I wanted to ask you a geopolitical question, but before going there, I want to I want to play a clip of Donald Trump talking about a what he calls the Genius Act that he signed that. And let me just bring it up here for you. Yeah, it's here.
This summer, I signed landmark legislation known as the Genius Act. I named it after myself. I didn't want to use my name, so I just called it the Genius Act, paving the way for widespread.
Yeah. Uh, how's it going with this genius, Matt?
Yeah.
And
I wish he was like being self-deprecating and farcical. I mean, there's a little bit of that in there, but this man is such a narcissist. He really does believe that these things should be named after him, regardless of what they are. They just airports, libraries, schools. We have the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., which is the National Performing Arts Center. And it's named the Kennedy Center after the assassinated president, John F. Kennedy. And they keep trying to add Donald Trump's name to it. I mean, like the narcissism of Trump, but then the sycophancy, right? That just the willingness of those in proximity of his power to just bend over and do whatever is necessary to try and make him happy is just absolutely revolting. So, yeah, I mean, it's the problem you have is I'd be one thing if he was just up there and again, self-deprecating kind of they called it Genius Act, whatever, and it's another when you realize that they have they have structured an entire form of government, an entire mode of governance around this man who has to be pleased like he's some type of psychopathic toddler. And so we've had always this problem throughout history of who's going to tell the emperor he has no clothes on. And you have this here, this very real case. I mean, we've seen it with American presidents where just the institutional narratives are so strong to provide dissenting information is incredibly difficult. And I could tell personal experiences of that with regards to Afghanistan, say. But now with Donald Trump, you have an issue where you have a mad emperor, you have a mad president, and so you don't want to upset him. Or the other side of it, those around him understand the best way to remain in that proximity of power and for themselves to self-enrich them, and for them to enrich themselves is to please him. And so, yeah, I mean, we scoff and we laugh at it, but this is very, very dangerous stuff.
Matt, the Trump administration started with the war, continuing or receiving the war that was started during the Biden administration. And then they started the war against Iran, and the Strait of Hormuz, one of the biggest difficulties to this day, to this moment, as there is a lot going on between the two sides, talking, hating at each other, and fighting going on. And then you see Saudi Arabia attacking Yemen, and the case of Yemen is just, the Red Sea being closed, the Bab el-Mandab being closed. It means that again, a new sort of escalation in the conflict. And then you see Israel attacking, attacking Syria, and they say that Turkey is building up in Syria. It seems that every time you look at the situation is escalating, somehow expanding itself. There is no contraction in what's going on in the West Asia.
No, and globally it's worse too. And globally the escalation occurs as well because, as you said, it's just not the Strait of Hormuz, but you're talking about the Bab el-Mandeb, you're talking about the Suez Canal being closed potentially by whoever wants to close it. Just send one drone and you'll shut the thing down. But then add in the Black Sea as well. And so these pressures globally on the economy because of these supply deficits for a whole host of commodities. It's just not fossil fuels we're talking about. I mean, it's not but it's also agricultural products. It's manufacturing commodities. I saw the other day, Nima, a few days ago the change in commodity prices in the U.S. year over year, and it is startling. It is startling. And a lot of these, with commodities, you're talking about the inputs into a process that eventually ends up, with a consumer purchasing something. And so you're looking at these inputs, how expensive things are already. For the thing that stands out in my mind was with one that's the top, where we've seen year over year an 84% increase in heating oil in the US. Now it's August, so that's okay. No one's running their heat. But what happens a few months from now, or a couple months from now, particularly in America's Northeast and Upper Midwest, when they start running their heat? But you look at it in other things as well. You look at it, say, with both, say, shortages in refined fuel products, particularly diesel, and the increase in or the absence of fertilizer. So you have those two inflationary pressures on farmers. What's going to happen? The United States, we use 4 million barrels of diesel a day in the US, and we've got a global diesel shortage. And then you're going to tack on to that, all the other costs that we see across the board in commodities. So, where this goes in terms of instability globally is something that I don't think people are really latching on to. What we saw in the last 6 months, the stresses endured by various Western states, say, not even talking about the developing world or the global South or anything like that, but just say about the Western states, the developed economies, the stresses, say, on Japan. Look at the yen crisis, right? The South Korean president, we've talked about this before, saying he can't sleep at night because he's wondering where he's going to get his energy from. But as well, then, too, the stressors within Europe and the United States that have been exacerbated by this war. And we haven't even really seen the impacts of these supply deficits coming into play. So what does that mean, geopolitically? A whole heck of a lot of stuff might happen. And then now you add in maybe the places that are really going to get harmed by these shortfalls, say in particular, nations in the developing world and the global South. And you start to say, okay, if there's an energy crisis combined with a food crisis in certain countries that maybe aren't the most stable, what can occur from that? This idea that, say, food shortages have led to, political crises that have toppled government, that's a pretty old story. That's a story the Romans would talk about. So where this goes, good God. I like the, we've said this before. We feel that we're only in the beginning pages of the book, or maybe beginning chapters of the book, but we're really looking at the beginning of this rather than certainly the midway point or end point.
He resolved everything. Yeah. Right now, he wants to resolve the problem between North Korea and South Korea, and he's just this guy is itching for more conflicts.
Right? Yeah, I know. I'll give him credit. At least he's talking about Korea. Because at least there's that, and at least it's not the Biden administration just going.
But he's trash talking South Korea.
Of course he is. Yeah, of course he is. And but at least there's conversation about it. I'm trying to put the best spin on this possible, I guess, but at least there's dialogue. Certainly, I think most of us look at. I shouldn't say most of us. A lot of us look at what Trump did in his first administration with regards to Korea, those efforts at diplomacy, as a positive. It didn't end up with anything, and certainly the Biden administration just went back to the typical American posture towards the North Korea. But at least there was an attempt there. And I think that that's what we need more of. We need more of those attempts, and the time maybe that it buys for things to change as well. If you're engaging in dialogue, maybe that dialogue doesn't end directly in some type of resolution, but maybe it builds trust, and maybe it allows for patience, and maybe in a crisis, it then provides for more time to pass before action is decided upon. And so, as we see the realities of modern warfare, as we understand how truly interconnected our globe is in all sorts of ways, but especially economic, this idea of, well, at least trying to talk to the North Koreans, you don't need to piss all over the South Koreans, but, you could try and talk to them. That is a good thing. I wish there had been more of that, right? More efforts, say with Iran that way. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see what he does with this. He may get frustrated and upset. He's very fickle, very temperamental. And I think his mental health his has deteriorated to a point where I don't even know if he could be deliberative if he wanted to be. I mean, he's so uh, uh, his explosiveness in either way is so demonstrated, and his inability to regulate his or filter what he is saying has become much more pronounced. I mean, it's never been great by any means, but it's we're at a point here where I think we really are seeing a mental deterioration of this man. Where does it end? And do we have to endure this now for 2.5 more years until he's out of office? If he decides to leave office, if that isn't a crisis in of itself. So yeah, I mean, I'm just overly pessimistic, as you could tell. But I think this idea of at least making this effort towards Korea, and those war games are provocative. I will agree with that. I mean, I took part in those war games 25 plus years ago. Ultra focus lens UFL. I mean, so as well as whatever one of the other ones was, and yeah, they are provocative. They are. They're the whole purpose is to destroy the North Korean regime and occupy North Korea. That's the end state of those games. I mean, so how that's not provocative, I don't know. But yeah, more dialogue than any of your podcast. That's what we should be pushing for.
Matt, we had some reports that it mentioned that the United States is increasing aviation activities near Iran, and they're talking about 5 KC-135R and the E-3B, AWACS being
Yep.
there, gathering information. What is that? What is this sort of activity?
Yeah, I'm not sure what they're doing here in particular. I don't know. I mean, if it was something, and I don't have it in front of me either, so I would say that if it was something that was in the moment, those aircraft would be flying without their transponders on. And so I don't think it's anything in the moment. They could just be repositioning them. They could be doing some type of exercise. They could be rotating in new air crews and doing, introductory flights to the region or whatever. I mean, there's a host of different things that be occurring here, but the overall idea, though, that the Americans might attack again and likely will attack again is there. And I think that's one of the reasons you've seen this switch with the Iranians from maybe a strategy of deterrence to a strategy of victory or defeat, I should say, right? So this idea, rather than having a strategy where the end goal is to make it so that the Americans choose not to attack again because the losses were so heavy, the region has been reordered, their forces have been reset in a way which is not conducive to them. I think the Iranians are switching to, and other people are saying this as well, right? Other people, the Iranians themselves have said it. We're switching to an offensive-minded, mindset here. This idea of defeat, make it so that the Americans can't attack again. And so I think these types of examples of, hey, there's still a lot of American firepower in the region, lead further credence to the notion that the Iranians are choosing offensive strategies going to defeat the Americans rather than just deter them.
Since the war started, there were multiple times we've heard about the use of nuclear weapons. The latest one was what Marjorie Taylor Greene was talking about. And how serious is that, in your opinion, when it comes to the use of nuclear weapons, and how game changer that could be for Donald Trump? Let's assume he's going to use it against, Pickaxe Mountain. He's going to hit the, nuclear facility or some military facilities in Iran.
Right.
And the other point is, Matt, from what we've heard, I try to find the best, try to see the Persian media, all these reports of the war so far. They couldn't neutralize or neuter a single military base in Iran. I'm talking about those underground cities of missiles and drones. It was a total failure. The whole operation. They couldn't. They hit some entrance of the entrance of these underground cities, but it seems that many of them had multiple entrances. It seems that they couldn't do that much damage to Iran and their capability to fire back.
Right. And the Iranians know that they're going to hit the entrances, so you're just prepared for it. So they hit the entrance and maybe like it caves in or there's a avalanche and rocks come down and the entrance is blocked. Well, you've got excavators pre-positioned to bring those out, bring out the heavy equipment, open it back up, put a new door back on. You're back in business. How long does that take? A few hours, a day? I mean, the Iranian preparation and planning for all this is clear. The Iranians understood how the Americans, the Israelis, their Arab vassals would attack them, and they prepared for that. They said, this is what the American force looks like. This is what their armament looks like. This is what those weapons are capable of. And so we are going to they're going to hit us with these standoff missiles that have 1,000-pound warheads on them. Okay, then we have to dig how deep to survive a 1,000-pound warhead. Okay, now dig 5 more feet just to make it be safe. Right. I mean, you've seen both sides prepare in this way, the Iranians competently, the Americans not competently. The example we give, of course, for the Americans is the 30,000-pound massive ordnance penetrator, the MOP, that the Americans dropped to great celebration at the end of the June 2025 12-day war. And that weapon was essentially designed for this war. That weapon was designed with the idea that we are going to need something to destroy Iran's underground facilities. Now, we still don't know how effective that weapon was. We do know that the Americans believed that the weapon would be effective. So they only built about 24 of them. And that's it. Right. And so the same way, too, with people ask, how come the Americans don't have more Tomahawks and how come they didn't plan better and have more JASSMs on hand and PRISM missiles and everything? They didn't think they need them. They believed the sales brochures for these weapons, and they really did think that these weapons would be precise with enough firepower to destroy whatever they wanted to hit. And they didn't take into account that the Iranians understood what weapons we had and that the Iranians would design their defenses to be able to withstand these weapons. And the Americans had no plan B, C, D. So when, after the idea being was that these weapons would be so effective, they would neutralize and destroy any Iranian defenses, and that within a week or two's time, the Americans would have air superiority and then soon have air dominance. And then our our non-stealth aircraft, the F-15s, the F-16s, the F-18s, could just fly over Iran as they want and bomb whatever was needed, right? And that was the idea, was that, well, let's not worry too much about the missile cities, because eventually we'll be able to put, a flight of F-15s on them and have them drop 12,000 or 15,000 pounds each of JDAMs on those missile cities, and that's how I'll destroy them. The problem was they were never able to do that because they can't get the F-15s or F-16s or F-18s into Iran because those JASSMs and Tomahawks and Prisms weren't as effective, again, as the sales brochure said they were going to be. And, this is where you see this split in leadership between competent leadership and incompetent leadership. Now, your question about the nuclear weapons, or your comments about the nuclear weapons, this is where it gets very dangerous, because we're dealing with something called usable nuclear weapons. And the Americans have 2 of these. They got the B-61 gravity bomb and then the W-76-2 warhead that's on our nuclear missile submarines. Both of these are smaller yields, so smaller explosive force than the Hiroshima bomb. The ones off the missile subs are 1/3 the size of the Hiroshima bomb. Meanwhile, the B-61 bombs that a B-2 would drop in this case is a fraction. The Hiroshima bomb was 15 kilotons. The B-61 can have a yield of as low as 0.3 kilotons, so a fraction of, And when I first started hearing this term, not in a sarcastic or facetious manner, of usable nuclear weapon, was back in the end of the second half of the Obama administration. And the problem, Nima, you have here, why we shouldn't disregard this and say Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't know what she's talking about. Only a madman like Donald Trump would use a weapon like this. Well, we do have a madman like Donald Trump in office. We've got Donald Trump in office. But the idea is that these usable nuclear weapons were built for the mission behind them was that they would be used against rogue nuclear states that had facilities that had to be destroyed with certainty. And the best thing to do that was using a low yield nuclear weapon. So you had these weapons that were put into service, that doctrine was written around, that were established as legitimate uses for nuclear weapons. And now we actually have this circumstance where you have the mission that these usable nuclear weapons were spoken about 10, 12, 15 years ago being the reality. And so it's not just a question of like Donald Trump being convinced to use these weapons. That'd be a pretty easy sell, right? Mr. Trump, Mr. President, this weapon has a fraction of the size of the Hiroshima bomb. It's not even really a nuclear weapon, have very small blast radius, almost no fallout. And this will essentially seal off Pickaxe Mountain forever. I was afraid they would have done this back in April, we'll say like Isfahan. And you could see how that would sell to Donald Trump, along with like the encouragement of, Mr. President, you'd be the first American president to have the guts to use a nuclear weapon since Harry Truman. You could see how that would appeal to Donald Trump. The problem that you add on to this, though, is that this is the mission that these weapons exist for. So if people are counting on an American military chain of command to say, well, nope, not going to use nuclear weapons. Well, this is the mission for those nuclear weapons. And so I maybe you'd have one or two officers in that chain of command who'd say, no, I'm not doing this. But you'd have plenty lined up to carry it out. Because again, this is the mission that these weapons were built for.